league leftover books or something, you know? No? Are you comfortable enough there, Bob? You look very comfortable. He's so comfortable, he's frozen. There you go.
You can't reach the unmute button.
Yes, I'm comfortable.
Good.
A little under the weather today.
Okay.
Can it slow, that's all.
Planning a barbecue, John?
Which John?
Yeah, asked if you're planning a barbecue or just wishing.
Let's see, memories past.
Yeah.
It was delicious.
Uh,
I got new photos I gotta download.
Uh-huh. Oh, so those are your photos?
Yeah, I should list the calories associated with each meal.
That would be discouraging.
Wow. Not for me, they've all been a conquest.
Is that for breakfast? You have that?
No, I have some good breakfast ones of bacon, eggs, home fries, grits, and a few, let's see, toast. What else? Oh, I got a real nice, let's see, French toast with a cream cheese filling.
Really?
Pretty good.
Oh, it's great. Fattening, but great.
Biscuits and gravy, John.
Grits, grits, really? You all like grits?
Grits
Oh,
are great.
I like grits, yeah.
I like grits, yeah.
I do too.
You go down south, and if you don't have grits with your breakfast, there's something wrong with you.
Well, I actually make them here, but yeah, when I go down south, grits and biscuits and gravy. I don't know, Rob. I am just not somehow not into that, but grits, yeah. Hell yeah.
My dad told a story when he first went down to Biloxi, went into a restaurant and ordered, bacon and eggs for breakfast. And the waitress brings it out and there was a pile of grits on his plate. And he calls her back and he says, "What's that?" And she says, "Them's grits." And he says, "I didn't order any grits." And she says, "You doesn't order grits, you gets grits."
I heard of some story somewhere about someone, probably a damn Yankee, saying, "These are the worst mashed potatoes I ever had," or something.
I was down in Carolina one time, and they had a menu that you ordered as a 2-wheeler, a 3-wheeler, a 4-wheeler, and it kept going that way. And the 18-wheeler deluxe included for breakfast, a half a chicken, ham, sausage, bacon, home fries, grits, toast, and I think it was 3 eggs. And some of these truck drivers are sitting down there like, okay, when's the next course? That was the appetizer.
John, is there anything wrong with 145.41 repeater? Because I'm not getting any return on the when I transmit.
Yeah, I'm getting it.
All right, never mind. It's must have heard me. All right, it sounds like it's okay. All right, why don't we get going?
Yep.
So, welcome to the activities meeting of the Meriden Amateur Radio Club, which I will call to order. We normally have call in, call sign identification, Tom. But since we're on Zoom, we don't, we just sort of dispense with that because it can be written down. You can see who's here. So we're very pleased to have with us tonight Tom Frenaye, Kilo 1, Kilo India. Tom has been a longtime amateur radio operator, many, many years. He has risen to prominence in the New England division as director for his many years, and has had several roles in the American Radio Relay League as well. He is not the division director currently and is running for that office with two other folks. Tom was also very involved in the New England QSO Party, and he was sort of the motivation behind that. He said he wanted to talk to us tonight about plans for 2022 for the New England QSO Party, making it even stronger than it already is. And I thought that would be a good topic for us to listen to. So with that, Tom said he'll take questions during his talk. If anybody wants to just raise their hand, our station manager, Rob, can handle those things. I usually turn it over to him, sort of like mission control going from Cape Canaveral to Houston after the rocket takes off. And so without any further ado, Tom, Meriden Amateur Radio Club awaits your thoughts.
Hey, Ed, thanks. Hope you can hear me all okay. I was just thinking of when I visited the club last, was it probably a good 10 years ago. If I remember correctly, you were on like the second floor of a building. I don't remember what the building was. Maybe it was a public building, like a fire station or something. I don't even remember, but I think Bill W1KKF was the president at the time, so that's been a while. But anyhow, greetings. The New England QSO, let me just start by saying, I don't know all of the call signs here, so welcome to some of you that I know and some that I don't. I don't see Al, but I see his call sign, N1 API, who's been active in the New England QSO Party probably most years. But let me just describe what a QSO Party is for those of you who aren't familiar with them. It's basically an on-the-air operating event focused on a particular state or region of the country, where the people in that state or in that region talk to people outside of the region mostly, and everybody outside of that state or region tries to talk to that state or that region. So for instance, there was a 25 years ago, there was a Connecticut QSO Party, a Massachusetts QSO Party, and I think Vermont and New Hampshire might have had one at the time. But the problem with QSO parties is the smaller the state, the less the activity, and the less people are interested in them. The more activity there is to a point, the more interest there is in people getting on the air and participating in them, either from the targeted area or from outside of it. When I was first licensed, one of the things I did after I made my obligatory, this is too many years ago, as a novice, when I was in junior high school, my first QSOs were on 2-meter AM because novices could do that at the time. But soon after that, I upgraded to general and got interested in traffic handling and nets. And I started to collect, trying to work counties, different counties. And then I got hooked into on-the-air activities like the QSO parties that existed in the 60s, and DX contest and sweepstakes. So I did a bunch of operating. And then when I was in high school, I participated in, I think, the Pennsylvania QSO Party or one other, I forget which one. And it seemed like a really good idea because there was I could get on the air, and this was almost, these were almost entirely on 80 through 10 meters. and tended to favor 20 meters. And depending on propagation, sometimes 40 or sometimes 15. So as a high school kid, I found that really interesting, and looked around and said, hey, there isn't one for California. So a friend and I decided to start the California QSO Party. And we did that in, I don't know, 1966, I think it was, as high school kids. And we did that for a couple of years, and then we went both off to college, and I handed it off to somebody else who took it over. And then eventually it got taken over by the Northern California Contest Club, who runs it today. And it's arguably the biggest state QSO party in the country, and they're going strong. But basically a QSO party is, I'll call it an excuse to get on the air, but it's also a reason to get on the air where you'll be popular, because people will want to work you in the New England QSO Party because you're in New England. So even with a QRP signal, you'll attract attention. So the idea is to get people active, get them on the air. You'll learn something about operating. You'll learn something about propagation. Well, whatever, I'll just say it that way. You learn a lot of things from it, and it's not a high pressure event like some contests can be. It's a fairly low pressure event where you turn the radio on and spend 15 minutes and decide if you enjoy it enough to keep going or not. And if you do, fine. If you don't, fine. It's not like you have to operate for 20 hours or 2 hours. It's whatever you feel like doing. And you take your time and you go at your own pace and so on. But for stations outside of the area, particularly in New England, many of them are fairly new hams, and they're looking to do things like either work all the counties or try to get the last state or two they need for worked all states, or something like that. So it's kind of a case where people can be very specific, looking for Connecticut or Vermont or whatever, Rhode Island, on CW or sideband, or these days digital modes. But it's again, it's low pressure, and it's an opportunity to get on the air, check your own station out. On some weekends, there's only one QSO party, and some weekends there's several. And these days, there's not only several, but there's digital contests going on as well. So there's a lot more activity now than there ever has been, particularly on weekends. So so QSO parties have been around for about at least 50 years. The Pennsylvania QSO Party claims fame to being the first one, and they started in 1957. New England actually had a QSO party in the 50s and early 60s. It was run by a group called the Connecticut Wireless Association. Some of you may recall that name, but they're a group that used to be mostly employees of ARL, and they had I think a 10-person club, and they had an event that was advertised in QST in the late 1961. And the idea was for New England stations to work other New England stations. That's all. That was kind of a limited goal and limited territory they covered. And that took place for maybe 5 or 10 years, and then it faded off into not happening anymore. And then in 2001, I started to talk to the people running the various New England QSO parties and said, what if we all got together and put together one that covers all of New England? That would do a couple things. One is make more activity, so it would be more visible for people trying to work New England. It would get more activity in New England, and it would be another incentive to try to get all of the counties on the air in New England. New England has 67 counties, which is kind of interesting because it's the same number that Florida has, which is another popular state QSO party. California actually has 58. So they're all kind of similar. I shouldn't say they're all similar. Texas has 250, and some of the others have much smaller numbers, and some have a lot more. But Connecticut and Massachusetts were the two QSO parties that were most popular, and I talked to the two groups that were sponsoring them, and they were definitely interested in putting together a joint effort to do a New England contest. The guys in Vermont said, sure, we'll join in, but we're going to keep our Vermont QSO party going, and they have. So we got this started, and the first one took place in 2002. So it's been going for 20 years. This year was the 20th year. We started out having, I don't know, 150 or so people sending in logs, and magically actually got all the counties on the air, and took off from there. Last year we had 1,100 entries. 1,100. That took a couple of things to make it that big, but it's kind of grown a little bit each year as we've encouraged more people to get active on the air. The contest is basically a 80 to 10 meter contest. Originally, it was CW and sideband, and in recent years, there have been a number of people that operate CW as well, and that's just fine. The way the contest works is that you talk to as many people from New England. Anyhow, it's real simple. You talk to everybody. You try to work as many states as you can, and Canadian provinces and countries, and your score is the number of states, provinces, and countries you work times the number of QSOs you make, with a little bit of a bonus for CW QSOs because they go slower, and a bonus for digital QSOs because those go slower. So CW and digital modes are 2 points apiece. Sideband is 1. And hams on the New England side, in many cases, can make more than 1,000 QSOs over the 20-hour period. So it's two 10-hour periods. It's the first weekend in May. And we actually had to set up the contest so that it avoided Deerfield. I think somebody mentioned Deerfield earlier in the discussion here, but Deerfield is a big event that takes place in New Hampshire. And originally we thought there was going to be a significant impact with conflict with Deerfield. So we started on Saturday afternoon after Deerfield has mostly ended, and go till about midnight on Saturday night, and then do 10 hours during the day on Sunday. So the activity is pretty high. And again, somebody can go, 30, 35 words a minute in the middle of the road, or they can take the side roads and go down the band or up the band and go to slower levels of activity and slower speeds on CW and slower QSO rates. So we try to accommodate everybody, and we don't discourage anybody. I guess I'll put it that way. A lot of contests these days say you can only send in electronic logs. We prefer electronic logs, but if somebody wants to scratch it down on a piece of yellow legal paper, that's fine for us. If you want to just log in a regular logbook and take us photocopies, take photocopies or pictures of it and send it to us, we'll take that as a log. We're not particular, we'll deal with it. And we're just happy to receive the logs, because the way we measure how successful we are is how many logs are submitted and how many QSOs are made.
Tom, can I ask a question?
So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Ed.
It's Ed. I really like QSO parties. Whenever they're on, I like the very rapid exchange, and you don't have a chance to spend a lot of time talking to anybody. One of the things that you see periodically is somebody, let's say, for example, there's a Florida and an Indiana QSO party, and you have somebody in another state calling, CQ, Indiana, and Florida QSO parties, and he wants them to call him. I often wondered about the etiquette of that. Is that really acceptable? So what he wants is, instead of him having to fight the pileup, he invites the QSO, the states having QSO parties to call him, especially if it's like Montana or South Dakota. It seems to me that's kind of questionable, but I wasn't sure whether I was being too prissy about the whole thing. I haven't seen a lot of people do that, but it's done periodically.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like any kind of on-the-air operating. there are some people who never call CQ themselves. And when you hear a station doing that, let's say it's for the New England QSO Party, and you hear somebody from Montana and they're calling CQ New England. They're trying to attract hams that are not inclined to call CQ themselves. And some people don't call CQ because they don't think they're loud enough. Sometimes they don't call CQ because they're shy, and they just are not as aggressive at looking for QSOs. So somebody outside of New England calling CQ New England is trying to find those casual operators that might not even be in the QSO party from New England. And if you do that, you might catch somebody in a county you don't have or a state you don't have. So I guess the answer is the more serious participants will often do that. Same thing for sweepstakes or ARLDX contest or CQWW. There are just people who answer CQs, and then there's people that call CQ themselves because they think they can do better getting more contacts. So it's kind of a management issue on how much is your time worth and how many people answer your CQs as to whether it's worthwhile. So there's no wrong answer there. The idea is to try to find ways to find additional QSOs in the area you're trying to reach. The problem you have is if you're from Montana calling CQ New England, the guy from Texas might call you because he needs Montana. And then you have to deal with, well, do I answer him or do I ignore him? Right. So it's it's all part of how do you present yourself on the air? Are you a nice guy, or you just keep calling CQ New England when somebody from Texas calls you? And then you could say, hey, I'm just looking for New England, or you could say, here's your report, and then go back to calling CQ New England. So, part of it is just learning to be a good operator and learning to be friends with other hams. And, there's a lot of people in the New England QSO Party or in any QSO party that have their own motivations. They might just want to find out if their new antenna in the trees is working. They might actually be trying to go for a score using QRP, or maybe who knows, maybe they're just looking for, maybe they used to live in New England and are looking for somebody that they know from when they lived there.
Yeah.
So, you really just kind of have to assume there's lots of different motivations. It's obviously who the diehard contester types are, because they're going quickly and there's a lot of CQing. But if you're a serious participant, you also look for people CQing because they're not tuning. And if they're not tuning, they're not going to call you if you're trying to CQ. So you have to do a little bit of each. And all of that is just kind of the magic of how do you maximize your score and the number of QSOs you have and the fun that you have doing it. And you may not care to operate CW and you just do sideband, and that's fine. You may not care to listen to 80 meters because it's so noisy in the, overnight or whatever. So you pick the frequency, you pick the mode, you pick how you want to operate, and it's really all up to you. And if you choose to compete, then you maybe operate a little bit differently. So hope, it covers a lot of territory, but there's no wrong way to do it. There's just different ways of doing it, some of which get different results, sometimes better than not. So one of the things we also have in the New England contest is a club competition. And what we do is we take scores from logs that indicate a particular club, and we put them all together to put together a club score. For instance, the biggest club in New England for contesting is the Yankee Clipper Contest Club. And there's usually about 90 entrants from the YCCC, and they have a huge score. But there's a bunch of other clubs that also enter. Last year's contest, there were 37 different New England clubs and about 60 or so clubs from outside New England that sent in scores. And maybe half the people that send in scores say, credit my club, whatever it is. For instance, last year, I think there was only one entry from the Meriden Club, and it might have been Al N1 API. I don't remember for sure, but I know he sent in a log, and a couple of others. There were, and some years it's more than that, but a typical, Meriden was like, I think 19th out of the 37 New England clubs in terms of score. So one person got 19th. So there's a bunch of clubs that had maybe only one entrant or maybe several that didn't even add up to the score that that the one member produced. So we encourage club activity. We typically get a half a dozen clubs with more than 5 entries and a couple that get over 10. And I guess for you, I would say as a club, it would be a good goal to try to hit at least 5 entries and maybe more than that who are actually active. Meriden's kind of interesting because the city of Meriden is right at the intersection of 3 counties. You're really in the northeast part of New Haven County, but Middlesex County is on the east side and Hartford County is on the north side, and you're not very far away from Litchfield County. So your members probably include people in all 4 counties of the 8 in Connecticut.
So one of our members, John, refers to him as the center of the universe. So maybe you are the center of the universe, John.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So it really is. I mean, it really is got 3 counties really close and one very close. So, New Haven is typically, along with Hartford, the 2 most active counties. But the 2 that are least active are Middlesex County, Middletown, and all the way over towards you, and Litchfield County. And that's partly because they have smaller populations and thus fewer hands. So one of the things I do before every New England QSO party is try to reach out to all clubs and people in the counties that have fewer hands to encourage them to get on the air. Because one of my goals as an organizer is to try to just be able to tell people that we're going to have all 67 counties on the air. That was pretty hard with COVID. I think we were missing 1 last year. So we did pretty good, but there were 4 or 5 or 6 of them that were not very active. And not very active means we only had about 5 to 10 contacts reported from each of those counties. So that really cut back because nobody wanted to go out mobile last year. And because mostly they weren't allowed to, really. They weren't supposed to be crossing state lines, and hotels and motels weren't open, and people stayed at home. This year was better, but still not a lot of activity. There's certainly more. Actually, some years we've had mobiles that have actually hit 30-something of the 60-something counties in a weekend. 1 or 2 of them were single ops that did that, and a couple were teams where you had a couple people operating and even somebody driving. So with mobiles especially, we try to get all the counties covered. For instance, one of the counties in northern Vermont, up in the Northeast Kingdom, I think only has 13 hands total. And if I look at those call signs, I don't recognize any of them. And so we almost always have to depend on somebody going mobile to Essex County, and Caledonia County is another one up there that are pretty scarce. So we work pretty hard to get them all on the air. And we do okay at it. So part of it is also there are people that are in it just to be competitive. They want to get the best score in New Haven County or Connecticut or New England. We offer certificates to anybody who sends a login that has 25 contacts or more. So it's a PDF file with this certificate, nice high resolution one to print out. We used to send paper certificates, but we got modern and send out the PDF file certificates, which look like this. And this is actually a plaque. So the top scorers actually get a plaque that has the outlines of the states and a call sign in their names. And in this case, it's somebody from last year who said, oh, save the expense, don't send me a plaque, but I'd already made it up, so now I have an extra. But that was the top score from Canada. So we offer plaques to the top scorers in each New England state. And I think every state has a top plaque for the low power entry, and a few states have a top score for a QRP entry. And then we have top scores across the country and for regions of the country. And so we have a lot of opportunities. There's 40 plaques that are sent out, and probably 90% of the people or more who send in a log end up with 25 QSOs or more. So they get certificates.
Hey, Tom, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
How do you pay for those plaques? Where is the money generated from?
We ask sponsors to sponsor the plaques. So the plaques I think they were 40. I think I raised it to $50 each a couple of years ago. But for instance, I think the Candlewood Club is the one that sponsors the Connecticut plaque. There are different groups that sponsor different plaques or individuals. So each year there's somewhere between 38 and 42 plaques that are awarded, at least in the last few. And we've got most of the major categories accounted for. We could certainly have more. For instance, the Hamden County Club north of me, I live in West Suffield, so I'm right on the Massachusetts border. Their club sponsors a plaque for the highest score in Hamden County. Most often it's somebody from their club that wins because they're the big club in that county. But there's different people that have different motivations for sponsoring plaques. There's somebody that does the highest score in Ohio, highest score in California. YCCC sponsors a plaque for the top club in New England and for the top DX score and a couple of others. So I mean, each group chooses what they want to sponsor, and we're pretty much open to any idea. We've got a couple of plaques that go to the top CW scores only and the top sideband only scores, and so on. So one of the resources for you to look at would be the New England QSO Party website, and I should mention it here. It's NEQP.org, NewEnglandQSOParty.org. And that has a lot of historical information. It's got results over the last 20 years, and it includes the results by state, by county in New England, by a bunch of different selections. And you can see how New Haven stations have done. You can see how the Meriden Club scores have changed over the years, and they have gone up and down depending on the number of entries. One of the things we also put together is something called Soapbox, which is what kind of a parallel to what ARL has done with their online contest reporting. It's basically the comments made by people in the contest when they send in their logs, like, you know, my rig broke, I only worked for an hour, or the first QSO party I've ever done, and I consider my 32 QSOs the best I've ever done ever. You know, whatever, you get a lot of interesting comments, and sometimes they have rules suggestions for change. And we have made changes to the rules over time, depending on the input we get. I guess I would say it's just kind of, we try to make sure that it's something that a part-timer enjoys and something that somebody who's serious and wants to operate seriously the whole event will enjoy as well. I would say most of the activity is on 20 meters, and a second band is usually 40. But the last 6 or 8 years hasn't been really good on 10 and 15 meters. And we expect the next 2 or 3 years to see a lot more activity there coming up. Let me just change to one other thing I wanted to mention. Like I said earlier, for our contest, We don't really care if you do electronic logging or not with contest software, although it's encouraged. We're happy to get a, you know, yellow legal sheet with your log on it, or just a picture of your station log. A lot of people use logging programs, and there's a bunch of them out there that do general logging, and they're all very good at that. Some of them are very good also at letting you take an excerpt of a log and just sending the contest sponsor your log that from their general logging software. And then there's some specialized software. Most people, maybe 80% or so, are using N1MM software for contesting, and it supports the New England QSO Party. Second one that's often used is N3FJP. Scott does a good job with his software, and we get logs in about 30 different formats, and but probably 80% of them come in those two formats. And out of 1,000 logs, we'll probably get 10 to 20 logs that are on paper. Just somebody, you know, just sends the paper in the mail, and that's fine. There's one guy that always does 1,000 or 1,500 contacts by hand and rewrites it by hand because he's blind, or his wife rewrites it. I don't know, but I don't care. That's fine. We'll take it, and we actually enter it by hand and use it to help score all the other logs. So a log isn't required, but if you actually operate and somebody else's log has you in it, and there are, you know, 5 or 6 QSOs that we see in other logs, if we can find your email address, we'll usually send a note to you saying, if you can, send us a log, we'd appreciate it. It's not required. The other station gets credit for the contact, even if you don't send in a log. And that's the case with most on-the-air events like this. So, number one is get on and operate. If you don't feel like keeping a log, or you don't feel like sending us one, that's okay. But we'd sure love you to send it in, because it helps us in our checking afterwards to verify all the contacts. And we do a pretty thorough job of that. There's actually something out there called the State QSO Party Challenge. And that started off about 2 or 3 years ago, when there were a couple of guys that said, hey, we enjoy state QSO parties and regional ones. Why don't we do something to encourage activity across the country? And they started this thing called the State QSO, stateqsoparty.com. And you can find that on their website. And they basically have summaries of all of the contests, all of the state QSO parties and regional ones. And they actually have a cumulative award for operating in lots of them. They keep track of who operates each one. You can get awards for operating all of them or most of them. And then they keep score cumulatively on each of them. And at the end of the year, there's I call it a contest of contests, where they determine who's been the most active in the most of them. So that's another fun thing about that QSO party operating.
Tom, do you have any idea why there's no QSO party for Alaska? I've never seen an Alaska
Nope.
QSO party. It's the one state I need.
I think there is.
I don't know in particular, but look at stateqsoparty.com.
I did
and
see
they'll have
Alaska
information.
listed.
Okay, yep. So then it just takes somebody in the area to decide they want to deal with it. Maybe they already get too many QSO cards. I don't know. And almost all of them are run by small groups of people, sometimes clubs, sometimes not. And at the Delaware QSO Party, one of the interesting things about the New England QSO Party is that we actually started it on top of the Indiana QSO Party. They already had one going, and we looked around and said, what are the good weekends to do it? We didn't want to do it midwinter, and we didn't really want to do it midsummer, and decided on May, because at that time of year, first weekend of May is actually a really good weekend for people to go out. in New England because the tourists generally aren't here. So it's a pretty good time of year. And there was, the Indiana QSO Party didn't seem like it would be too much of a problem. And as it turns out, it hasn't been. The Delaware QSO Party has been added on the same weekend. And probably the most competition we've had is after talking to us, the guys out in the West Coast in the 7th call area decided to create their own, and they put it on the same weekend. So they're very active on the first day of the two contest days. So we had a lot of competition with them the first day and still haven't decided to move, but it actually means that if you're from New England, you probably have an easy time of working all the 7th call area states. So they're happy to work New England, we're happy to work them. And they have their own separate scores and their own, a lot more counties to activate and so on. So they're actually in the N1MM software, there's actually a module that people who are not in any of those 4 states can use to operate all 4 contests on the same weekend. So if you're not from New England or the 7th call area or Indiana or Delaware, there's a logging program that will deal with all of them. And it's pretty slick, works great. Because in the end, in one of these competitions, whatever your logging software says your score is, when it gets to the people that are scoring the contest, they will check your score, check the people you've talked to and make sure that you're both in each other's logs. And they will also recount the number of QSOs and the number of, from New England, they'll count the number of states and provinces and countries you worked and recalculate the score. So what your own logging software tells you is their best estimate as to what your score will be. But in reality, the contest sponsors double check all of that and end up with they recalculate your score and put it online and verify it. So it's pretty, the background part of it is it takes some time and effort. For instance, in the New England QSO Party this year or last year, we had 1,100 logs, but there were, out of that, 283 were from New England, but the total QSO total was 150,000 QSOs made by all of the stations that participated. There were 887 different New England stations on the air. That's a hell of a lot. And it was proportional by the number of hams in each state, basically. And in Connecticut, there were 164. And then, for example, in Vermont, there were only 58. But in the hardest counties to work were three in Vermont and 1 in Maine, down East Maine. So we get a lot of activity. We get a lot of people doing mobile most of the time, and hopefully this next year it'll be we'll be back to normal. I guess one other thing to mention before I go too long here, I'm talking way too much. Ed, you didn't cut me off. Last year there were 32 stations active from New Haven County, 1,400 plus QSOs made, and 6 logs from New Haven County. The top score was W1JQ, in the top score in New Haven County. W1JQ, who I think is in New Haven itself or nearby. N1API was 2nd in New Haven County. The other ones that were active were in New Haven County were W1CTN, W1NG, N1ABY, and AB1DQ. And I think Jim is somebody who works with you, Ed, if I'm not mistaken. Is that Jim?
He's a club member. He's also in the Yale Club and an independent
Oh,
spirit.
okay. Okay, good. So I guess we're 2 from the Meriden Club that were active.
I saw the chat from Al about the Alaska QSO Party. I looked it up. I don't see it under the contest calendar for QSO parties. And when I looked it up under Alaska QSO Party, it said inactive in big bold letters, updated 2020. So I'm not quite sure where this magical Alaska QSO party is, Al. I'm sure you're right, but I just don't seem to be able to see it. And I know if I knew CW, I'd be able to get Alaska, but I don't, so I haven't. But I still don't see Alaska anywhere. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
So one of the things that operating in QSO parties does is that it helps you learn more about propagation and when the right times are. For instance, if I was to say today that I want to work Alaska, the time of day I would look for trying to reach Alaska would be like 4 to 6 in the afternoon on 20 meters. And maybe this fall I might look on 15 meters at that time, but 20 meters would probably be the band to focus on. And you can use lots of other propagation tools to figure out when the best time is, but in the end, it's the more you operate, the more you learn about when and where, obviously. So let me bring this to a close and just say that state QSO party activity group has really helped to boost the activity in all of the state and regional contests. COVID-19 has helped to boost it because a lot more people were home and not doing other things. Sometimes it helps to have rainy weather because people stay home, but if you have rainy weather, there's not as many people that go out mobile. And I'll tell you, the first weekend of May in northern New England, there is snow along edges of the roads, sometimes more than you want. And I guess my goal for the next year is to, number one, get out the results from this year out sooner. I typically don't get them out to March or April, which is a long wait for people. So my goal is to get that out sooner, and I've got it partly on the way. I'm ahead of last year, put it that way. And also is to get more mobiles active. So I'm working on that. We've had as many as 10 or 12 mobiles. We've had mobiles active from almost all counties. And I will say almost all, because mostly for Connecticut, we don't need activity except maybe Litchfield and sometimes Middlesex County. And we've never had a mobile active from Nantucket. Nantucket is special. The ferry costs a lot to get there, and they don't run often enough to make somebody want to take a mobile rig over there. And it's I think I remember correctly, I looked at it, was like $200 or $250 round trip to do Nantucket. So that's pretty discouraging. A couple of years we had somebody go to Martha's Vineyard, and a group of people went out there, and that was very good at getting Martha's Vineyard on the air. So those are the two difficult ones from Massachusetts, as well as Franklin County up north of Springfield. A couple, it goes Hampton, then Hampshire, and then Franklin County near the Vermont border. So I'm always looking for people in the harder counties.
So Tom, how
Yeah, go
does
ahead.
the New England QSO party compare to the 13 colony party? That
I don't know.
Admittedly, it's a week long, but there's a lot of enthusiasm for that I've seen. Does it compare at all as far as volume?
Yeah, I'd say it probably is comparable. I have actually not looked to see what the total QSOs are for that. As you say, it's a week-long activity, and they spread it out among a lot of different stations in each state, which is great. The New England QSO party, I would say, is probably third in the country, third or fourth. California, I think, is first. Florida is very good, and the 7th QSO party is very good. New England is probably fourth behind Florida and the 7th call area. And those are the major ones. And again, there's lots of smaller ones. And really it depends on how much they're promoted each year and how much competition there is and how much activity there is. The less activity there is, the less people send in logs. And like, for instance, this last weekend, I think it was the New Hampshire QSO party And the club that's sponsoring that has not done very much in recent years to promote it. And they probably, the biggest QSO totals from out of state were like 10 contacts. So that's underperforming. And I think you want, if you have a QSO party, you want there actually to be a party, not just a solo drinking event, so to speak.
Well, this
All right,
past,
back to you, Ed. If you have more questions, we'd be glad to answer them.
This is Mike. I have a question. Anyone
Oh,
else?
sure.
Not this weekend, but a week ago before, there was 4 QSO parties, and they all had the same exchange. And for somebody that's not normally going to enter into those contests, you can't pick and choose them. There's so many of them at the same time. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with that?
Well, I guess first of all, you could choose not to call CQ yourself and only answer stations that you know are in whatever state it is. But like I said, there are some logging programs that will let you log all of them, but they just won't calculate the score for each one. So for instance, if I get on, when I get on in the New England QSO Party, I log the contacts that I make with the 7th contest, the 7th call area one in Delaware and Indiana. And then afterwards, I just send them the same log for all of them. And the contest sponsors figure that out. You know, if I get a log from you and it has, contacts for, maybe, for 5 different QSO parties, I'm only going to care about the ones that count for the New England QSO Party. There's no penalty if you have contacts for any of the others. Actually, I should mention that same weekend as the New England contest, there's a worldwide contest sponsored by the Italians. So there's lots of European activity during that contest, but they're all trying to work other Europeans. So the answer is get on, log it all. Even if it's just, some of them require the same county and state information. Some of them might have a serial number. I think it's a good thing that they're not all the same. There's some variety, but if they're not all the same, it makes it confusing when you're trying to log them all. But I would just say, do the best you can, and the contest sponsors will sort it out. And be glad of that. The more serious you get about it, the more you'll look for software that has a little more capability to switch between one and the other. And there are some that do that. I don't know. Does that help you, Jim?
Well,
I'm sorry, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it does. But the problem is, you're trying to answer if you're playing one contest. A lot of times you don't know which station setting CQ because they don't always tell you CQ in the name of the state, and it becomes very confusing there. But I was curious about what you mentioned just before. You can send the same log to multiple contests. So, for example, in this last week I mentioned they all had the same exchange. Out of staters simply sent their report in state. And so that's easy. You send everybody the same report and send the same log to all the contests.
Yeah, and in your case, there are some people who say, "Oh, look, I got Texas and I got Nebraska. Now what do I do?" And they actually make different logs for each contest and send them in. But I recommend not doing that. Just send the whole log and let the sponsors sort it out, and they'll credit you with what counts for their contest. So don't make it harder on you than you need to. Just operate, be happy to work them, and let them be happy to have you answer.
Question and observation, Tom, K1RCT.
Yeah, Rob.
Thanks. So the question is, I wondered if you know what kind of QSO total that the NEQP would have. And I know it's not a week long like our club president was trying to quantify based on 13 colonies. I know the Connecticut section had 13,000 QSOs, and that's a week long. It's a week-long QSO party, but they had just slightly over 13,000 QSOs on that. So I didn't do the math to do it on a daily basis, but I wonder how NEQP stacks up against that to quantify.
Sure. Overall, 154,000 QSOs were in the logs.
Well, that's a lot.
2/3 of those were from New England stations. So about 90,000 or 95,000 were New England. And the other 50,000 or so were from outside New England. And that's 2 10-hour periods, total of 20 hours. So less than a day.
That's pretty
So
good,
there's a
actually.
lot of activity.
A lot of activities, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Tom, got a question. I'm wondering if there was ever a consideration of moving the start time to coincide with the S.A.M QSO party on Saturday morning.
Yes. And I think that's I think more often than not, the requested change. And we have continued to keep it to start after Deerfest or Deerfield ends. But that's probably the one thing that I would consider changing. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. Because what really happens is people get interested in the NEQP and operate there for a few hours. And then by the time the New England one starts, I think we see a drop off in the activity. So that would probably help us to do that. And I, some of that's just inertia probably on my part, but certainly considered out.
Okay, very good. And by the way, usually when you work another contest and they're asking for an exchange, if you give them state and a report, they'll say something like, well, I need a number. So you just give them a number, start at 1 and just give them a number. They'll usually ask for the other exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens is the more experienced people will learn how to work somebody that's new to the contest or new on the air or didn't even know what a QSO party was, and help them walk through the process of giving the exchange that is needed. So like Al said, if you just tell them you're in Connecticut, if they want a serial number, they'll ask you for that. If they want to know your county, they'll ask for that. They're very used to casual participants that want to help out with a contact, or they just want to work whatever state that the station calling them is in. So it's a friendly process, and I'll say the more honey that you give in your report and your activity, the more stations will call you because you sound like a nice person. So you try to be the nice person, and you work a lot of casual participants. And in many QSO parties, it's the casual participants that really make the big totals, because at some point you work all the people that are really active, and the ones you want are the guys that are tuning by and just happen across you, and you're calling CQ, and you hook them, and now they know that they're calling you when you're in a competition and you'd like the points. So it's an interesting process to get good at it, and some people do really well at it, and some don't. I'll put it that way. So I hope you will decide to get a group together to be active in the first weekend of May next year. Take a look at the NEQP.org website. There's some pretty lengthy articles for the results each year, and a long list of participants in each state and county with their scores and the number of contacts they made and so on. But the write-up highlights the top stations. It has some pictures. It has some tables and graphs, and take a little time to look at it and think about it. And if you can get on for, even 5 minutes or 10, 15 minutes, all of it helps. And we really like to see the activity and encourage it at any level.
Okay, other comments or questions?
I have nothing else in the chat, Ed.
Okay. I keep being told there's an Alaska QSO party somewhere, so that one looks like it was a week long. So I guess the cold air slows the electrons down. So
I don't want to go out in the winter up there.
I'll keep trying. They had a WBZ contest this weekend, the 100th anniversary of the radio station. And I tried for 3 days to find this station. And as you might expect, I couldn't hear them at all, but I heard the people in South Dakota who were talking to them, or the people in Nebraska or Florida or anywhere else, but in Boston or Massachusetts where they were coming from. I even spoke to the guy who was running it, and I tried 80 meters in the evening and I couldn't find them. I don't do FT8 and I don't do CW, so I was relying on phone. I thought in the evening I'd get him on 80 meters, but I couldn't hear a soul. Did anybody work WDZ?
I didn't, but actually you remind me something about the New England QSO Party. Is one of the things that's interesting about it is you don't actually work that many other New England stations.
Yeah.
Because most of the time you're on a 20 or 40 meters and your signal is skipping over the New England stations. It's very hard to work all of the New England counties. It's especially hard from New England.
That's true for the 13 colonies as well. It's
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah. All right, you have any other comments you want to make, Tom? This, we're,
Nothing on that, but if you let me talk for a few minutes about the ARL election, I'd appreciate it if you have time.
well, I think we gave equal time to Fred, so I think we can probably give you a few minutes. Yeah, just be mindful of the clock, that's all.
Okay. Well, thanks for sticking around. I guess what I would say is I'm running again for ARL director. I lost 3 years ago by about 40 votes and have not been satisfied with how the ARL board is functioning in the last 3 years. So I threw my hat in the ring. There's 2 other candidates. There's 2 Freds, AB10C, who I guess is the Fred you said spoke to the club here earlier. And he's a good speaker and does a lot with the Nashua Club. And there's Fred Hoppengarten, K1VR, who lives in the Boston area and is known well for his antenna zoning and book and other activities involving getting antenna permits. I'm running again because I described some of my background with ARL QSO, the New England QSO Party, and my activities as a kid starting the California QSO Party. After college, after graduate school, I actually took a job as a radio operator in Antarctica. So I spent a year as a communications specialist working for a contractor for the National Science Foundation at one of the Antarctic bases, the smallest one actually. There were 6 people there for the winter. There was a radio operator, a cook, a station engineer, a medic, and a station manager, and 1 scientist. And in the summer, we had about 30 scientists that were in and out of there. So I got to operate radio when I was off duty and when I was on duty. Did a lot of activity on the air, learned a lot about propagation, actually operated field day from there the year I was there, which was pretty fascinating. And after a year, came back to the US and saw an ad in QST and decided to move to Newington, and I ran the contest program there for 4 years as the contest manager. After that, I spent 20 years working in IT in one of the insurance companies in the Hartford area, and used a lot of my ham radio skills in networking, understanding Ethernet and token ring networks and you name it. And did a lot of work with personal computers and databases as well. So had an interesting time there, retired there after 20 plus years. Ended up doing something that I recommend everybody do, which is get involved in your own town boards and commissions, whether elected ones or appointed ones, because having a ham involved in different activities, not just the not just the EOC and not just like the fire or police radio areas, but all areas. Hams and communication is really important to the general community. They just don't know it. And you know a lot that they don't know about technology. So I got involved in my town in boards and commissions, ended up on the planning commission, a computer advisory commission, and a couple of others. And then eventually ended up running and serving a term as my town's first selectman and mayor about 10 years ago, which was really interesting. Not an easy job, I would say. So I encourage anybody to get involved in some way in their town's government. Even a small obscure commission is a good thing because you get to know who the players are, you get to know who's who, and when something comes up that amateur radio can do for public service, you'll know about a lot of it, and vice versa. When something comes up that may impact you as a ham, already being involved in the town gives you some extra credibility and insight about how to deal with whatever is going on. So that's been something I think is been very important in my career, and I highly encourage it. So the things that I've been most critical about with ARL over the last 4 years, 3.5 or 4 years, is that I don't think we've had a good enough and strong enough presence in Washington. The FCC has been closed for 1.5 years. I mean, the building is physically still closed, and they got people working from home. But ARL still needs to be talking to them, emailing them, and finding a way to get in front of them from time to time on the issues that are important to us. As best I can tell, ARL sent a group to Newington 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, from Newington to Washington, and took a picture in front of the FCC building. And as far as I can tell, very little has happened since then. Now, we've got some really important things in front of the FCC. One of them dates from 2013, which is when we first asked for some changes for digital modes so we could use PACTOR 4 and some other modes that can be accommodated in a voice bandwidth signal. FCC has been sitting on that for a long time. There have been a number of other things that we're still waiting on. We put in a proposal to make modifications to the technician license to make it more modern. There's a longer story there, but the basic answer is we asked the FCC for technicians not to operate only CW on 80, 40, and 15 meters. Right now, technicians can use 80, 40, and 15 in a restricted segment on CW only. And you look at that and say, why? And the reason is because at one point, CW was required for all licensees. But when Morse code was taken away by the FCC from all license classes, they left that in there and did not change it so that technicians would have access to digital modes. And that hasn't ever been updated. So after a long process of review of the current licensing process, looking at the old novice license, and looking at the most, how do I say this? The best way to approach the FCC, we recommended two options to the ARL board. The one was to start something similar to the old novice license. That's a fairly simple exam that had very simple privileges, and we didn't really go into lots of detail on that, but the examples are what they're doing in Canada and Australia with what they call a communicator license, where you get access to a lot of bands with very low power, 15 or 10 watts or 15 watts. I think the Australians can use 20 watts, but not all of their bands, but just some of them. So that was one recommendation, and the ARL board didn't like that because it might open Pandora's box with the FCC, and there was some fear that if we asked for another license class, they would say, well, why do you need so many in the first place? Why don't we just change it back to a couple. Because right now the FCC is only granting tech, general, and extra, but they're maintaining people who have novices, and people who have advanced class licenses can still renew. So they're already maintaining 5. And the idea that they might change their software to go to 6, we thought might be too big of an ask. And the FCC is very reluctant to change software because, well, like any business, changing in software is hard to do, put it that way. And the government is worse. So the board took our other suggestion, which was to modernize the technician and allow digital modes on some 80, 40, and 15 meter segments because that's what most new hams want to do, other than talking on a repeater. And there's a lot of interest in digital modes. And the additional thing is a lot of emergency communications activity happens on digital modes. And particularly, there's a lot of activity on 80 and 40 meter nets, emergency management activity. And the way it's currently set up, the two groups, the CW ones and the sideband ones never meet on the same, in the same place. So we encouraged a small segment on 80 and 40 and 15 for sideband for the technician license, because the technician already has parts of the exam that include HF access. It includes operating with 1,500 watts at microwaves. So you know that if somebody can do that safely, they can operate low power on the HF bands. And the test itself includes HF, so the FCC wouldn't have to change the technician exam at all in order to allow it. So the ARL board took that option, sent it to the FCC 4 years ago or so, and it's been sitting ever since, along with a half a dozen other things that are very important to the amateur community. So back to my first point about why I'm running is we need to put some pressure on the FCC to get some of those things to the front of their queue. They've been preoccupied with Wi-Fi and cell phone and other technology things happening in the world, and they've let ham radio suffer as a result. We have not kept up with the changes in technology, and the FCC hasn't kept up with the licensing and the privileges that we're allowed to use. So I think that's incredibly important, and we have to have good relations with them because they're the ones that regulate ham radio for us. And if the FCC is not going to respond well, then we have to be talking to members of Congress who also have their ability to pressure the FCC because they're on oversight committees for the FCC. So in the House and the Senate, there are committees that individual members can be encouraged to ask the FCC to move things along. So that's incredibly important. Another issue that continues to come up is we recently had an issue with the FCC where they took another look at RF safety rules and made some changes to the rules for RF safety. As hams, we were mostly exempt from those rules in the past. Now we actually have to do the calculations on all of our all the bands we're active on, just to make sure that we're operating within the limits that have been set by the FCC. And for the most part, the way we operate is intermittent and doesn't cause us any issues because of our power levels and usual activity. It's only the extreme levels of activity that might cause problems. Excuse me, but we were unable to change the FCC's mind on that to leave the rules as they were and not require an extensive set of calculations. Now, the ARL website has a place you can go to do those calculations. It's not particularly demanding. It's fairly straightforward, so anybody can do it. But it's another bureaucratic step that we didn't have to go through. And I think the ARL, if it had more leverage there, would have been able to change that. A second thing that's happened more recently is that we now have to pay $35 for licensing, new license or renewal. That doesn't apply to vanity calls. They have their own issue there. But the new licensees are paying $35 each for that and for anybody that wants to renew. So they proposed it at $50, and the ARL board, the best I can tell, started off not sure if they wanted to oppose it, and finally came to the conclusion that they did. They did file comments with the FCC, and the FCC said, well, we can move it from 50 back to 35. And that's how they ended up doing it, because they had what they thought was a mandate from Congress to put in fees for all radio services. Realistically, the FCC could have said, look, ham radio people are funding their own technology. We spend our hundreds or thousands of dollars building our stations, and we give away our time for public service in lots of cases. And if it's not public service, we're doing a lot of training on the air, learning propagation, learning how to operate, learning lots of things, building things, learning technology, becoming engineers, you name it. So Congress could, the FCC could easily have chosen to exempt amateur radio from those fees, and we didn't have the juice, the leverage to do that. So that was disappointing.
So Tom, if you could just wrap up in another minute or so, what you
keep
are going to
going.
bring to the table.
Yep, got it. Thank you, Ed. RF, just the whole RF noise environment is a real problem as well. And that's another one where we really have to put in leverage with the FCC to both get some enforcement and to try to change some rules that are now 40, 50 years old that have not been updated. So one of my deals is I really want to strengthen the ARL involvement with the FCC and Congress. I think the ARL board has lost its focus on dealing with getting new hams and trying to encourage activity on a local level with clubs and elsewhere. And instead, the ARL board tends to like to deal with micromanaging and fine tuning ARL contest rules or DX rules or something like that, rather than looking at the organization from a strategic level. 5 years ago, the board created a strategic plan that was a 5-year plan, and that's run out. There's nothing that's been started to redo that plan. We've gone through 3 CEOs in 5 years. I can't say I supported the first 2. The last one I don't know well enough, who was hired last year. He seems to be better than the other 2, but we've had a real problem at hiring the right person to run the ARL in Newington, and the board has to take responsibility for a large percentage of that. I hope we did the right thing last year. The board did the right thing, and that remains to be seen. We have 9 jobs currently posted on the ARL website, and there's less than 90 people that work in Newington. So there's 10% of the positions in Newington are open, and some really key ones are open. The key ones include the IT director that's been open for 1.5 years, the public relations manager that's been open for a year and a half, and the emergency management director, who it took the board, and the board did the hiring basically. The board hired that person for the CEO, which the board shouldn't have gotten into. But it took them a year to hire somebody. It took them almost a year to do the job description. He was there for a year, and then he left 2 months ago. So they're hiring again. So you can't run an organization with a lot of the key positions missing, and the board really has to focus on getting that stuff done. So I'll leave it at that. I have a lot of background on the board. I've been chairman of a number of the boards and commissions, including the entry-level license commission that I talked about you to earlier. If you actually go to neqp.org/K1KI, you'll find a bit more information from me, about me. And my phone number is there. My email address is simple, k1ki@arl.net. Works. And be happy to take phone calls or emails if you have any questions once we're done here. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to talk. hope to see you in the New England QSO Party next May. Back to you, Ed.
All right, well, thank you very much, Tom, for your time and all the information you imparted. Does anyone have any other comments they want to make? Rob, anything from you, sir? When all else fails, ask for Rob.
Sorry,
Okay.
guy. I had it on mute.
Okay.
Nothing
Anything,
more.
nothing from you?
No, sir.
Okay, Rick, did you have a comment?
No, just wanted to thank Tom very much. It was a very interesting talk. I learned something new tonight, so thank you, Tom.
Hey, good, no
All
problem.
right, just want to remind everybody that the next business meeting, we're going to be having nominations for officers. So it'd be a good idea to attend. You know, there's the slate of officers for this year will be discussed, as well as anybody, other nominations. And Steve has sent out or will be sending out a sort of a time, not a timeline, but a
Decision tree.
thank you, decision tree, which will describe how the things will be done. Some of you have written to me saying that you want to change the way we vote, and that's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. It was too late this year to do it that way, but we have another year, God willing, ahead of us. And we can always bring that up as new business to decide if we want to revise the bylaws and the Constitution to change the way we elect officers. No one anticipated COVID, but if there's a desire to change, we can certainly consider that, plus other things. One other announcement, CQ Santa apparently is going to be on for the first Saturday in December. So that's something we'll talk more about as well. It should be an interesting meeting. It's the 14th, I think, of October, because the October 1 is a it's one of those months where the second Thursday is like in the third week almost. So
Ed, you might want to check the chat. I think I posted a couple of links for the Alaska QSO Party.
yeah, I saw that.
All right.
You've thrown down the gauntlet, gentlemen. I've got to try to do that. So we'll see. Maybe I'll call CQ Alaska and see what happens. Maybe I'll get a fish responding or something. You never know. All right.
Rob-
Any other comments, gentlemen?
Yeah, Ron KB6UF is going to Alaska, but I don't know if he's going to operate. I'll have to see if he operates in the county owners, and if he's on, I'll give you an email.
Please, that would be wonderful. I'd appreciate that. I've got a lovely 6 to 80 meter antenna, 34 feet in the air, courtesy of a whole bunch of people on this call. And that'd be good to be able to use it.
You got a pretty good club station that's got a 10, 15, 20 meter beam that you can point directly at the state of Alaska.
Yeah, I thought of that, but I kind of feel like I need to do it with the equipment I have at home. I thought about that, but anyway, it's the only one I need for worked all states, but I actually haven't been keeping a log of it. So it's just my own personal log. So anywho, all right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Tom, thank you for your thoughts, and good luck in the upcoming elections. Gentlemen, will be dismissed. Do we take a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Okay. Any opposed?
Hey,
No. All right. Very good. Since it was passed almost unanimously, I wish you all a healthy and a happy rest of the night and week and remainder of the month, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.